Sometimes fate brings two people together in such an amazing way that their story may even be hard to believe. No one ever knows where exactly the two lonely paths will cross, by pure chance or divine intervention. But at some point, all the puzzle pieces fall into place to form one big picture, and then there is nothing anyone can do about it. That's the best way to describe what happened to a young woman named Emmy Abraham. She was born into a fairly wealthy family and spent her childhood in her homeland in Sweden. After finishing high school, she moved to London where she got a college degree. Her life was perfect. She graduated from college and went on to work as an actress in Amsterdam. By the age of 29, she was the director of a theater in Vienna. At first glance, everything in Emmy's life seemed to be planned out to the smallest detail, everything but the young woman was lonely. Due to her work schedule, never-ending tours and business trips, she was never able to find her soulmate. And at a time when all of her friends had long been married and even had children, Emmy was spending her evenings all alone. It's not that she didn't get courted, she did, but for some reason it never felt right. Emmy was 29 years old. She was going to turn 30 in a week. But for some reason, she wasn't the least bit excited about it. To take her mind off her sad thoughts, Emmy decided to treat herself to a little vacation and go to Amsterdam. One day, she was sitting on a bench waiting for her friend with whom they'd made plans to spend the rest of the evening. Emmy was watching the passers-by and couples in love and couldn't help but feel jealous of them. The young woman was feeling dreary because there was no one in her life with whom she could share all her joys and sorrows. At that moment, she closed her eyes and made a wish, hoping that it could actually come true. After all, her birthday was coming up. At some point, Emmy noticed a homeless man approaching her. Most of the time, the young woman tried to avoid such people. For some reason, she was terribly afraid of them. With each step, the homeless man was getting closer to the young woman, while Emmy seemed to have been glued to the wooden bench. The homeless man turned out to be rather young. Almost all of his face was covered with a beard. He was dirty and he smelled bad. Having approached Emmy, he asked her for the time, although there was a huge clock right in front of the bench. The young woman looked at him in bewilderment and immediately answered, 5:30. As Emmy now recalls, something inexplicable was happening. I have never talked to a homeless person in my entire life. I always made a point to stay as far away from them as possible. But to this day, I still remember how impressed I was by his confidence. After all, there was this huge social gap between us, but he didn't seem fazed by it and simply started talking to me. Since she had the time as she was waiting for her friend, Emmy didn't chase away the stranger but decided to partake in the dialogue. Little by little, they got into a conversation and the woman started feeling very comfortable around the homeless man. He seemed to understand her perfectly. However, she was even more drawn to his beautiful brown eyes, which she couldn't stop staring into. Strangely, she didn't feel any discomfort. The conversation lasted no longer than 10 minutes, at which point Emmy's friend arrived. Before leaving, Vic, that was the man's name, jokingly made a date with Emmy, at the same place in 5 days. The man's confidence was astounding and frankly impressive. Sure, the woman wasn't planning on coming back for the second date, and the homeless man was probably also going to forget about it. But throughout the week, Emmy couldn't stop thinking about Vic. Having given it some thought, the young woman decided that she had nothing to lose. Emmy still had a whole day left before going home. She decided to take a walk by the same bench so that she could see from afar whether the homeless man would show up. To her immense surprise, he was already waiting for her. They had a great time together. They talked a lot about life and got to know each other better. Emmy still remembers with a smile. Vic clearly prepared for this date. He even cleaned up a little, but his hands and nails were terribly dirty. He arrived on a small bicycle and had a suitcase with him, the kind I thought only crazy people had. Later, I found out that he had his sleeping bag and a can of beer inside. That same night, the homeless man told Emmy that he'd once traveled through Europe, but he quickly ran out of money. Things didn't exactly go according to his plan. Vic was from the USA and he had no parents. Trying to get by on small jobs, he spent all of his money on alcohol. He had a problem, and he admitted it to himself. So that's how he ended up on the street. At that point, he'd been living in the park for over a year. Vic understood that he was just a homeless drunk, but when he saw Emmy, something inside him changed. He hadn't had a drink since that day. The young people talked until late in the evening. Vic had an incredible sense of humor, and the woman felt very at ease around him. At the end of the night, Emmy said that she was going back to Vienna the next day. Not knowing if they would ever meet again, Emmy gave Vic her phone number to be polite and went home. Back in Vienna, the woman couldn't stop thinking of Vic with warmth in her heart. The day Emmy turned 30, her phone rang. She was reluctant to pick it up, as she was expecting it to be yet another birthday call. But instead, she heard Vic's familiar voice. At that moment, Emmy's heart skipped a beat. "Hi, I remember that it's your birthday, so I thought I'd come by and congratulate you personally," the man started. "I want to come up to your apartment for a visit. May I?" Emmy was so shocked that it took her some time to realize that Vic had managed to come all the way from Amsterdam to see her. Emmy remembered that day for the rest of her life. Vic and Emmy have been together ever since then. The man moved in with the young woman and immediately began looking for a job. He hadn't had any alcohol since the day they met, and just 1 month later, he was a completely different person. It was hard to believe that he ever used to live on the street. Having dealt with countless bureaucratic delays, Emmy and Vic got married 2 years later. At first, the man worked as an electrician, and when the couple had twins, he saw their growing family as a challenge. He now had to work even harder to support them all. The former homeless man started a small repairs company. It's been 15 years since then, and the couple is doing great. Their kids know how their parents met, but they can't process the details yet. They just think it is funny that their dad used to live on a bench. Later, Emmy wrote a book called How to Fall in Love with a Man Who Lives in a Bush, because she literally found her happiness under a bush. Together, the couple appeared on British TV where they talked about the book and their love story. As Emmy herself says, "In all these years, I have never once regretted coming to that meeting. We never even fight. He is exactly the kind of man I dreamed of all my life." Each of us has our own love story. We're all tied by an invisible thread to the people we're supposed to be with. And this story is the best proof of that.